In my line of work, the truth is rarely found in what people say. It is found in the ledgers. It is found in the quiet, unassuming columns of a spreadsheet where a single decimal point, misplaced by accident or intent, can unravel a billion-dollar corporation. I am an auditor. My life is dedicated to the detection of variance, to the discovery of discrepancies between the reported reality and the actual truth. I have spent 15 years training my mind to notice when a pattern is disrupted, when a rhythm stutters, when the numbers simply do not add up. I believe that I left this scrutiny at the door of my office in downtown Chicago, that I hung up my skepticism with my coat when I returned to the sanctuary of my suburban home. I was wrong. The greatest discrepancy of my life was not hidden in a tax shelter in the Caymans or a shell company in Delaware. It was happening right in my study, behind a keypad I thought only two people knew. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a day that typically tastes of stale coffee and endless conference calls. The sky over the suburbs was a bruised purple, heavy with clouds that promised a storm but refused to deliver one. I had come home early, a rarity for me. My 3 o'clock client, a manufacturing firm with a nervous CFO, had canceled at the last minute due to a regulatory compliance issue they needed to scramble to fix. Instead of staying in the city, I felt a strange, magnetic pull to return to the quiet of my neighborhood. I wanted to surprise Sarah. We had been drifting lately, two ships passing in the calm but foggy waters of a 10-year marriage. I thought perhaps we could order takeout, open a bottle of wine, and remember why we had signed the contract of our lives together. I pulled my sedan into the driveway, the engine purring into silence. I did not hit the garage door opener immediately. I sat there for a moment, letting the hum of the road fade from my ears. The house looked perfect. It was a colonial revival we had purchased 5 years ago, with manicured hedges that were trimmed with geometric precision and windows that reflected the darkening sky. It was the American dream packaged in brick and mortar. Through the bay window of the first floor, I could see a light on in the study. That was odd. Sarah usually worked from her office at the agency on Tuesdays. She was a top-tier realtor, selling dreams to people who could barely afford the down payments, and she took pride in her availability. I stepped out of the car, closing the door softly. I do not know why I did it. Perhaps it was the auditor in me, the instinct that whispers when a variable has changed without authorization. Instead of walking to the front door, I walked across the grass, my shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. I approached the side of the house, toward the study window. The blinds were drawn, but not closed completely. There was a gap, a slice of illuminated stage visible from the darkening audience of the yard. I looked inside. Sarah was there. She was standing in front of the large mahogany desk I had inherited from my grandfather. She was not wearing her usual business casual attire. She was wearing a dress I had only seen once before, a sleek, charcoal silk number that hugged her silhouette, paired with heels that were impractical for showing houses but perfect for a dinner date. She looked beautiful. She also looked frantic. She was checking her reflection in the glass of the bookcase, smoothing her hair, adjusting the neckline of her dress. Then, her demeanor changed. She took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring, as she turned toward the wall safe hidden behind the replica of an antique map of Illinois. I watched, frozen in the twilight, as she moved the frame aside. Her fingers danced over the keypad. I knew the code. It was our wedding anniversary. June 14th. 614. Simple. Sentimental. The safe beeped, a green light flashing. She opened the heavy steel door. What happened next was a sequence of movements so practiced, so fluid, that it stopped my breath. It was not a hesitant action. It was a ritual. Sarah lifted her left hand. With her right hand, she gripped the platinum band on her ring finger, the engagement ring with a solitary diamond that had cost me 3 months of salary, and the wedding band that sealed our vows. She slid them off. There was no hesitation, no moment of remorse, where she looked at the symbol of our union and sighed. She simply removed the rings as if they were uncomfortable shackles. She placed them onto the velvet shelf inside the safe. Then, she reached into her purse, which was sitting on the desk, and pulled out a different ring. It was a simple, cheap-looking fashion ring, something that drew no attention. She slid it onto her finger. She closed the safe. She spun the lock. She replaced the map. She checked her phone, a smile touching her lips, a smile that did not reach her eyes, a smile of anticipation that I had not been the recipient of in years. She grabbed her purse and walked out of the room, switching off the light. I stood in the garden, the dampness seeping into my socks. The logic of the situation slotted into place with the cold click of a revolver hammer. She was removing the ring. She was hiding the evidence of her marriage in the most secure place in the house, a place she assumed I would never check during the day. She was going out to meet someone, and she wanted to be single for the evening. She wanted to play a role where I did not exist. I heard the front door open and close. I heard her car, the white SUV she insisted was necessary for clients, start up in the driveway. I ducked behind the large oak tree near the porch as she backed out. She was driving fast, too fast for the residential zone. I watched her taillights disappear around the curve of the cul-de-sac. Silence returned to the street. I walked to the front door. My hand did not shake as I inserted my key. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm, like a war drum, but my hands were steady. I was an auditor. I had just discovered a massive irregularity in the books. Now was not the time for tears. Now was the time for documentation and correction. The house smelled of her perfume, a lingering scent of sandalwood and jasmine that used to make me feel at home, but now felt like a cloying fog of deceit. I locked the door behind me and engaged the deadbolt. I walked straight to the study. The room was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I turned on the desk lamp. The pool of yellow light illuminated the space where she had just stood. I walked to the map and swung it aside. The safe confronted me. It was a high-end model, electronic, with a backup key slot. I stared at the keypad. The numbers seemed to mock me. 6, 1, 4. The day we promised to be faithful. Ideally, I should have felt rage. I should have wanted to smash the desk, throw the computer, scream until my throat was raw. But the rage was compressed, condensed into a small, super dense sphere of cold determination in the center of my chest. I punched in the code. 6, 1, 4. Beep. The lock clicked open. I pulled the door. There they were. The rings. They sat on the black velvet, sparkling innocently. They looked so small, so insignificant. Just metal and carbon. Yet, they represented the entirety of my adult life. Beside them, there was nothing else of value. No cash, no documents. She was using our high-security safe as a jewelry box for her infidelity. I reached in and picked up the engagement ring. It was cold to the touch. I remember the day I bought it, the nervousness, the certainty that she was the one. I looked at the inscription inside the band. Forever. A standard engraving. A standard lie. I placed the ring back on the velvet. My mind began to race, calculating the variables. If I took the rings, she would know I knew. She would come home, find them gone, and the confrontation would happen tonight. She would cry, she would lie, she would blame me for working too much, for being emotionally distant. She would spin the narrative. She would try to control the damage. No, that was not the optimal strategy. If I confronted her now, I was reacting to her timeline. I needed to control the audit. I needed to set the terms of the liquidation. I looked at my own hand. The gold band on my finger felt suddenly heavy, constricting. It felt like a tightening noose. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled it off. There was a pale line of skin underneath, a ghost of the commitment I had kept. I placed my ring inside the safe, right next to hers. Now there were 3 rings. Her engagement ring, her wedding band, and my wedding band. A graveyard of promises. I closed the safe door. I did not lock it yet. I pressed the program button on the inside rim of the door. The system beeped, waiting for a new code. I needed a number. Not a random number, but a number that carried weight. A number that would be a message, even if she didn't understand it immediately. I thought about using her birthday. Too easy. I thought about using the date of her graduation. No. Then I remembered. Her mother, a stern and principled woman who had passed away 3 years ago, had always been Sarah's moral compass. Sarah terrified of disappointing her. Her mother's birthday, October 12th. I punched in the numbers. 1, 0, 1, 2. The safe chirped. Code accepted. I closed the heavy door and turned the handle. The bolts slid into place. I tried the old code. 6, 1, 4. Error. I tried it again. Error. The marriage was effectively locked out. But this was not enough. I needed to leave a paper trail. An auditor always leaves a report. I opened the center drawer of the desk and found a piece of heavy, cream-colored stationery. Her personal stationery. I took my favorite fountain pen, a black lacquer instrument that wrote with absolute precision. I stared at the blank page. What do you say to the person who has just dismantled your reality? Do you write a manifesto of your pain? Do you list the grievances? No. Brevity is the soul of command. I wrote, let him buy the new one. I paused. It needed more. It needed to be clear that this was not a tantrum, but a judgment. I added P.S. The code has changed, just like our status. I waited for the ink to dry. I did not want it to smudge. Everything had to be clean. I folded the note once, creating a sharp crease. I opened the safe again with the new code, 1012, and placed the note on top of the pile of discarded rings. It sat there like a tombstone. I locked the safe again. Now the clock was ticking. I checked my watch. It was 5:30. Sarah would likely be out late. Dinner with clients usually meant returning past 10. I had 4 hours. I went upstairs to the master bedroom. It looked the same as it had this morning. The bed was made, the pillows arranged in that decorative way I never understood but always respected. I went to the closet. I did not grab everything. Taking everything would look like panic. I took only the essentials. 2 suits, 5 shirts, jeans, underwear, my toiletries kit. I packed them into my leather weekender bag with the efficiency of a soldier breaking camp. I walked into the bathroom and cleared my shelf of the medicine cabinet. Razor, toothbrush, cologne. I left nothing of myself behind in that intimate space. When I was done, the right side of the sink was barren, a white porcelain desert, while her side remained cluttered with creams and lotions. The visual contrast was satisfying. I returned to the study. This was the most critical part of the extraction. I sat at the desk and booted up the family computer. I pulled my external hard drive from my briefcase. I did not just copy my files. I copied everything. The tax returns, the bank statements she had downloaded, the digital copies of the deed to the house, the car titles. I backed up the entire My Documents folder. I knew Sarah. She was careless with digital security. She likely had emails, chat logs, or photos saved in folders she thought were obscure. I would analyze those later. I needed the raw data. The progress bar on the screen moved agonizingly slowly. 20%, 40%. I sat there in the silence, listening to the hum of the hard drive. My eyes scanned the room. I saw the picture of us on the bookshelf, taken in Hawaii 3 years ago. We looked happy. I tried to remember if I was happy then, or if I was just failing to notice the discrepancies. I realized now that her smile in the photo was the same practiced expression I had seen in the window reflection. It was a pose. I turned the photo face down. 60%. I took out my phone. I went to our banking app. We had a joint checking account, a joint savings account, and individual credit cards that were paid from the joint funds. I did not drain the accounts. That would be illegal and would look bad in front of a judge later. Instead, I logged into the administrative panel. I set up a transfer limit on the checking account. I canceled the overdraft protection. Then, I initiated a transfer of exactly half of the savings, my legal share, to a new account I had opened months ago for a potential business venture I never pursued. It was clean. It was fair. And it would leave her with significantly less liquidity than she was used to. 80%. I heard a noise outside. A car door slamming. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was she back? It was too early. I moved to the window and peered through the blinds. It was just the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, unloading groceries. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. 99%. Complete. I ejected the drive and slid it into my bag. I took the physical files from the bottom drawer, our birth certificates, passports, insurance policies. I left photocopies in their place. I was not stealing, I was securing assets. I took one last look around the study. It was a room where I had spent countless hours working to pay for this house, for her car, for the vacations. It felt alien now. It was no longer my study. It was a crime scene. I walked to the kitchen. I did not leave a note on the counter. The note in the safe was the only communication she deserved. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge. I drank it standing up, staring at the stainless steel appliances. We had argued about this refrigerator. She wanted the one with the smart screen. I wanted the one that was reliable. She won. Now, the screen was displaying a slideshow of our photos. I watched for a moment as my face and her face cycled past. I reached out and unplugged the refrigerator. The screen went black. The hum of the compressor died. Silence. I picked up my bag and walked to the front door. I disabled the alarm system, but I did not set it again. I wanted her to be able to enter the house. I wanted her to walk in without hurdles, to feel safe, until she tried to open the safe. I stepped out into the cool evening air. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree. I walked to my car, placed the bag in the passenger seat, and got in. I did not look back at the house as I backed out of the driveway. To look back would be to hesitate, and there was no room for hesitation in the audit I was about to conduct. I drove toward the highway. I had booked a room at a business hotel near the airport, generic, efficient, and far enough away that she wouldn't think to look there. As I merged onto the interstate, the city lights of Chicago began to twinkle in the distance, a sprawling grid of electricity and chaos. My phone sat on the center console. It was silent, but I knew that silence was temporary. Soon, the notification would come. Soon, she would return home. She would act the part of the weary wife, perhaps calling out my name to an empty house. She would go to the study to return the ring, to put the costume of our marriage back on before I supposedly arrived. She would reach for the keypad. She would enter the date of the mistake we made 10 years ago, and the machine would deny her. I imagined the moment of confusion, the second attempt, the third, the realization that the mechanical brain of the safe was rejecting her entry. Then the panic, the search for the emergency key, the opening of the door, the sight of the 3 rings, the note. I merged into the fast lane, accelerating. The road ahead was clear. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness, certainly. It was the grim satisfaction of the equation finally balancing out. I had initiated the sequence. The dominoes were aligned. All that was left was for gravity to do its work. I reached the hotel 40 minutes later. The lobby was sterile and smelled of lemon polish. I checked in, declined the offer for a breakfast voucher, and went up to the room on the 12th floor. I threw my bag on the bed and set up my laptop on the small desk. I opened a new spreadsheet. I named the file resolution. Column A, Assets. Column B, Liabilities. Column C, Leverage. I began to type. I listed the house, the cars, the accounts. Then I listed the intangibles. Her reputation, her job, her social standing. These were assets too, and they were far more volatile than stocks. My phone buzzed. I looked at it. It was a text from Sarah. Hey, honey, running a bit late with the client. Hope you're not starving. Picking up dinner on my way home. Love you. I stared at the words. The casual deception was breathtaking. Love you. A closing salutation appended like a signature on a fraudulent contract. I did not reply. I turned the phone over, face down. I waited. An hour passed. Then 2. I worked on a spreadsheet, building a comprehensive map of our financial life, highlighting every transaction that looked suspicious over the last 6 months. The picture was becoming clearer. The dinners, the spa days, the cash withdrawals. It was a pattern of funding a second life with the resources of the first. At 9:45 p.m., my phone buzzed again, and again, and again. I did not look, but I knew. She was home. Then the ringing started, a continuous, desperate trill. I picked up the phone. The screen displayed her photo, a smiling picture from a birthday party. I watched the call connect and disconnect as it went to voicemail. She called again immediately. I silenced the ringer. I walked to the window of the hotel room. I could see the stream of headlights on the highway below, red and white rivers flowing in opposite directions. Somewhere out there in the dark suburbs, in the house that was no longer a home, the panic was setting in. She was reading the note. She was looking at the empty space where my ring used to be. She was realizing that the silence in the house was not peaceful. It was the silence of a judge who has already passed the sentence. I turned back to my laptop. The cursor blinked in the cell, next to leverage. I typed the truth. I wasn't just going to divorce Sarah. I was going to audit her entire existence. And unlike her, I had the receipts. The game had officially begun. I closed the laptop, sat back in a chair, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to close my eyes and breathe. The mechanism of betrayal had been engaged, but the mechanism of consequence was just warming up. I waited for the next move, but I already knew what it would be. She would try to lie. She would try to gaslight. She would try to charm. She didn't know that the man she married, the soft, accommodating husband, had left the building. The man waiting in this hotel room was the auditor, and the auditor never loses a case. The silence of a hotel room is distinct from the silence of a home. A home's silence is heavy, filled with the phantom echoes of arguments, laughter, and the settling of timber. A hotel room's silence is sterile. It is the vacuum of a space that belongs to no one, a temporary container for transients. I sat in the ergonomic chair that was bolted to the floor, the glow of my laptop screen the only illumination in the room. On the small table beside me, my phone vibrated against the veneer surface. It was a persistent, angry buzz like a trapped insect. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was, but I looked anyway. Sarah. 11 missed calls. 4 voicemails. 3 text messages. It was 10:15 in the evening. By my calculation, she had been home for approximately 30 minutes. The timeline was proceeding exactly as I had anticipated. She would have entered the house, perhaps calling out my name, feigning the cheerful exhaustion of a hard-working professional. She would have seen the dark kitchen, the unplugged refrigerator, the absence of my shoes by the door. That would have been the first tremor of unease. But Sarah was an optimist when it suited her. She likely assumed I was asleep, or perhaps out on a late errand. Her priority would have been the ritual. She needed to return the ring to her finger before the husband, the audience, appeared. I closed my eyes and visualized the scene in my study. I knew the mechanics of that safe better than the engineers who designed it. I knew that after 3 failed attempts, the keypad would lock out for 15 minutes. It was a security feature designed to thwart thieves, but tonight, it was thwarting a lie. She would have typed in 614. The red light would have flashed. She would have frowned, thinking her finger slipped. She would have typed it again, slower this time. 614. The red light again. Panic would begin to prickle at the back of her neck. She would try a 3rd time, perhaps thinking I had changed it to her birthday, or maybe just out of sheer desperation. And then, the long, high-pitched tone of the system lockout. She was currently trapped in a 15-minute purgatory. She couldn't leave because she had no ring. She couldn't call a locksmith, because how would she explain that she was locked out of her own husband's safe while he wasn't there? She could only wait. And while she waited, she was calling me. I reached out and turned the phone face down. I was not ready to speak to her. Conversations were fluid, emotional, prone to manipulation. I preferred data. I turned back to my laptop. The spreadsheet I had named resolution was open, but I needed to go deeper. I needed to understand the scope of the deficit. I logged into our primary investment account. For years, I had managed the macro aspects of our finances, the retirement funds, the stocks, while Sarah handled the day-to-day household expenses. It was a division of labor that I had thought was efficient. I realized now it was a vulnerability. I had been looking at the forest while she was busy chopping down the trees. I clicked on the transaction history for the last 12 months and exported the data to a CSV file. I began to sort. I filtered by merchant category, restaurants, travel, cash withdrawals. The numbers began to tell a story that was far more detailed than the one I had constructed in my head. I saw a recurring charge for a consulting fee to a company called Horizon Partners. It was $2,000 a month, every month for the last year. I frowned. We didn't have any consultants. I highlighted the entry and ran a search on the company name. It was a generic LLC, registered in Delaware. A dead end for most people. But I had access to databases that the average person did not. I cross-referenced the tax ID. It linked back to a property management firm in downtown Chicago. Specifically, a firm that managed high-end executive apartments. My stomach tightened. $2,000 a month was not a consulting fee. It was rent. I sat back, the realization washing over me like ice water. This wasn't just about hotel rooms and dinners. Sarah, or perhaps Sarah and Brian, had an apartment, a secondary location, a nest. You don't rent an apartment for a fling. You rent an apartment when you're building a parallel life. You rent an apartment when you are planning an exit strategy. I looked at the dates. The first payment was made 14 months ago. 14 months. I felt a phantom ache in my chest, a dull pressure where my heart used to be. 14 months ago, we had taken a trip to Napa Valley. We had walked through vineyards, held hands, talked about renewing our vows. I remembered her laughing as she swirled a glass of Cabernet, telling me how happy she was. She had already rented the apartment then. The Sarah who held my hand in Napa was a hologram. The real Sarah was already moving furniture into a bachelor pad in the city. I went back to the data. I needed to know more. I looked at the home improvement category. Last November, we had discussed redoing the guest bathroom. I had authorized a transfer of $15,000 to her personal account to handle the contractors. I checked the outflow. The money had gone into her account, yes, but it never went to a contractor. A week later, there was a transfer of $8,000 to a car dealership. I cross-referenced the dealership. It was a luxury import lot. I checked our insurance policy. We only had 2 cars listed, my sedan and her SUV. There was no third car. So, who drove the car she bought with our bathroom money? I didn't need a detective to answer that. Brian. The rage flared again, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. Rage was a liability. Rage made you sloppy. I needed to be cold. I needed to be the liquidator. I took a screenshot of the transfer. I took a screenshot of the Horizon Partners payments. I created a new folder on my desktop labeled evidence_dissipation under her assets. In a divorce court, proving infidelity is one thing, but proving the dissipation of marital assets, spending community money on a paramour, was the golden ticket. It wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about restitution. My phone stopped buzzing. The 15 minutes were up. I checked the time. 11 o'clock. Back in the study, the safe would have beeped, signaling the end of the lockout. Sarah would be frantic now. She would realize that guessing the code was futile. She would have to use the physical override. The emergency key was hidden inside the hollow spine of a specific book on the top shelf, a copy of The Wealth of Nations. I had told her where it was years ago, joking that it was the only place money was truly safe. I imagined her climbing the stepladder, her hands shaking, pulling the book down. The key would slide out. She would rush to the safe, insert the key into the hidden slot behind the logo plate, and turn it. The heavy door would swing open. She would reach in, expecting to grab her rings and erase the evidence of her evening. Instead, she would find a shrine I had built. My wedding band, her engagement ring, her wedding band, and the note. Let him buy the new one. I waited. The reaction would be immediate. The phone lit up. It wasn't a call this time. It was a text. David, please. Pick up. This isn't what you think. I stared at the screen. It was exactly what I thought. It was mathematically precisely what I thought. Another text. Where are you? We need to talk. You're scaring me. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I was scaring her? I was the man who folded his socks and balanced his checkbook. I was the most predictable entity in her universe. That was why she felt safe betraying me, because she thought I was a constant, a fixed variable that would never change. Now that the variable had moved, the equation was collapsing, and that terrified her. I did not reply. To reply would be to engage in a dialogue, and the time for dialogue had passed. We were now in the phase of notification. I turned off the lights in the hotel room and lay down on the stiff mattress. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. My mind continued to process the data. 14 months. The apartment. The car. The lies. Every memory of the last year had to be re-examined, audited for truth. The time she stayed late at work. The weekend conferences. The sudden interest in yoga retreats. It was all fraudulent. I must have drifted off at some point because the next thing I knew, sunlight was slicing through the gap in the heavy curtains. It was 6:30 in the morning. I woke up with a headache, a dull throb behind my eyes. For a second, I reached for the other side of the bed, expecting the warmth of a body. My hand hit the cold, starched sheet of the hotel bed. The reality crashed back in. I wasn't home. I didn't have a home. I got up and showered. The water was too hot, but I didn't adjust it. I needed to feel something other than the numbness. I dressed in a fresh suit, tied my tie with mechanical precision, and checked my reflection. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes. But my gaze was steady. It was Wednesday, a banking day. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop again. The first phase of the plan, the discovery, was complete. Now came the containment. I logged into our primary bank's portal. It was 7 a.m. The fraud department would be opening soon. I picked up the hotel phone. I didn't want to use my cell. I didn't want her to see the line busy status if she tried to call. I dialed the bank's platinum service line. Good morning. You've reached Sovereign Bank. This is Jennifer. How can I assist you today, Mr. Mitchell? The voice was cheerful, professional. Good morning, Jennifer, I said, my voice calm and authoritative. I'm calling because I've detected some highly irregular activity on my joint accounts, specifically regarding the secondary cards issued to my wife, Sarah Mitchell. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. Let me pull up your file. Can you verify your security answers? I went through the security protocol. Mother's maiden name, name of first pet, street of child at home. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I have your accounts here. What specific transactions are you concerned about? Jennifer, I believe my wife's identity may have been compromised. I lied. Or perhaps it wasn't a lie. The woman spending my money wasn't the wife I knew. I'm seeing large transfers to entities I don't recognize, specifically a Horizon Partners and a luxury car dealership. I do not authorize these. I'm worried about identity theft or perhaps a clone card situation. Given the scale of the funds, I need to take immediate preventative action. I understand, sir. That is concerning. We can certainly investigate those charges. I'd like to do more than investigate, I said. I need to freeze the joint checking account and suspend all credit cards issued under this account number, effective immediately. I want to place a fraud alert on the entire portfolio. Sir, if we freeze the account, no withdrawals or charges will be approved for either cardholder until the investigation is resolved. This includes automatic bill payments. I'm aware, I said. I've already moved my necessary operating funds to a secure, separate account. This is about containment. Please freeze it. I cannot risk losing any more assets. Very well. I am initiating the freeze now. This will decline any pending transactions and block all future ones. We will issue new cards and send them to the address on file within 5 to 7 business days. Actually, I interrupted. Can you have those mailed to my office address? I am currently staying elsewhere due to this security issue. I don't want the new cards intercepted at the house. I can do that for you, Mr. Mitchell. The freeze is active as of now. Thank you, Jennifer. You've been very helpful. I hung up. The guillotine blade had dropped. In the modern world, money is oxygen. Without it, you cannot move, you cannot eat, you cannot function. Sarah lived her life on plastic. She rarely carried more than $20 in cash. She relied on the tap of a card, the beep of approval. I checked my cell phone. No new calls. She was probably asleep, exhausted from the panic of the night. Or perhaps she was awake, plotting her next move with Brian. It didn't matter. Her strategy was based on resources she no longer possessed. I left the hotel room and went downstairs. I needed coffee. I found a small cafe across the street. I ordered a black coffee and a bagel. I sat by the window, watching the city wake up. People were rushing to work, stressed, distracted. I felt a strange sense of clarity. At 8:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. Sarah calling. I'll let it ring. At 8:17 a.m., Sarah calling. I'll let it ring. At 8:20 a.m., a text. David, stop this. We need to talk like adults. I'm going to the office. We can meet for lunch? Please. She was trying to normalize the situation. She wanted to pull me into a lunch, a public space where I wouldn't make a scene, where she could use her sales tactics to spin a story. She would tell me it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, that she ended it. She didn't know I knew about the 14 months. She didn't know I knew about the car. She thought she was negotiating a misdemeanor when she was actually on trial for a felony. I finished my coffee. I had work to do. Not my actual job. I had emailed my firm stating I had a family emergency and would be working remotely for a few days. My work today was the systematic dismantling of the triangle. I opened my laptop again using the cafe's Wi-Fi. I needed to draft the document that would be the centerpiece of Chapter 3, the report to the board of directors of her agency. But first, I needed to see the impact of the freeze. I logged into the banking app on my phone. I went to the Pending Transactions tab. It was empty. Then, at 8:45 a.m., it appeared. A red line. Starbucks, $6. 45 declined. Reason, account frozen/fraud alert. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted bitter, but satisfying. She had tried to buy her morning latte. The routine. She was trying to pretend everything was normal. The machine had told her otherwise. At 9:10 a.m., another red line. Shell Oil, $45. 00 declined. Reason, account frozen/fraud alert. She was trying to get gas. She was likely low on fuel. At 9:15 a.m., my phone rang. It wasn't Sarah. It was the house landline. She was calling from home? No, she was probably calling from the car, realizing her cell service might be next if the bill was on auto pay. It wasn't, but the fear would be there. I answered this time. Hello, David. Her voice was shrill, laced with a panic that was no longer hidden. David, what is going on? My car didn't work. I'm at a gas station and I look like an idiot. The attendant said the bank flagged it for fraud. I kept my voice calm, almost detached. Hello, Sarah. Don't hello, Sarah me. Did you do this? Why are you doing this? I'm securing the assets, Sarah, I said. I noticed some irregular activity. Large sums of money disappearing. Rings disappearing. I assumed we were under attack. You know exactly where those rings are, she hissed. I found your note. How dare you? You can't just leave and lock up our money. I have to get to work. I have a showing at 10. I suggest you ask Brian for a ride, I said. Or perhaps he can lend you some cash. After all, you bought him a car with our bathroom renovation fund. He owes you a lift. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. The air left the conversation. You know, her voice was a whisper. I know about the car, Sarah. I know about the apartment at Cypress Creek. I know about the 14 months. I know about the consulting fees. I know everything. I could hear her breathing, jagged and shallow. The saleswoman was gone. The manipulator was stripped naked. David, wait. Please. You have it wrong. It's complicated. It's not complicated, I corrected her. It's simple math. You subtracted loyalty and added liability. I'm just balancing the books. You can't leave me with nothing, she cried. I have no gas. I have no cash. You have a very expensive engagement ring in the safe, I said, and a wedding band, and a car that belongs to your lover. I suggest you liquidate some assets if you're experiencing a cash flow problem. David, please. I love you. The words hung there, grotesque and distorted. Transaction declined, I said softly. I hung up the phone. I stared at the device in my hand. My heart was pounding, a heavy thudding against my ribs. It wasn't easy. Hearing her voice, hearing the panic. Part of me, the part that had loved her for 10 years, wanted to fix it. Wanted to transfer the money, drive to the gas station, and hear her explanation. But that was the weakness she relied on. That was the old David. The auditor knew that sunk costs were sunk. You don't throw good money after bad. I blocked her number. Not permanently, but for today. I needed focus. I went back to the laptop. I opened a new document. I typed the header. To the Board of Ethics and Compliance, Zenith Real Estate Group from a concerned stakeholder subject. Violations of corporate conduct and misappropriation of company resources. I wasn't just going to cut off her supply. I was going to cut off the source. Sarah and Brian worked in an industry built on reputation and trust. They worked for a company that prided itself on family values and ethical transparency. I began to compile the data. I had downloaded her work emails the night before. I had found the threads where she and Brian discussed steering clients toward properties where they could get higher commissions, bypassing company protocols. I found the emails where they coordinated their business trips on company expense accounts, trips that coincided perfectly with the credit card charges for spas and dinners I had uncovered. This wasn't just an affair. This was corporate malfeasance. They were using the company as their personal piggy bank for their romance. I attached the PDFs. I attached the timeline. I didn't send it yet. I wanted to wait until they were both in the office. I wanted them to be sitting in their glass-walled rooms, feeling safe, perhaps commiserating about crazy David and how they would fix this. I checked the time. 9:45 a.m. I packed up my laptop and left the cafe. I needed to move. I couldn't stay in one place. I felt like a hunter who had set a trap and was now circling the perimeter, waiting for the snap. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the rhythm of the road soothe my nerves. I drove past our house. I couldn't help it. I parked down the street, hidden by the overgrown hedge of the neighbor's yard. Her SUV was gone. She had managed to leave. Perhaps she used the last dregs of gas in the tank. Perhaps she called Brian. I looked at the house. It looked peaceful. The lawn was green. The curtains were drawn. It was a beautiful lie. My phone buzzed again. It was a notification from the smart home system. Front door opened. That was strange. She had just left. I opened the app and pulled up the camera feed. It wasn't Sarah. A silver sedan had pulled into the driveway. A man was stepping out. He was tall, wearing a suit that was too shiny, with hair that was perfectly gelled. Brian. He walked up to the door. He had a key. Of course he had a key. I watched on the small screen as he entered my home. He looked annoyed. He was talking on his phone. I switched to the interior camera in the living room. The audio feed kicked in. I don't care, Sarah, Brian was saying. He froze the accounts? That's your problem. You said he was passive. You said he was a pushover. This doesn't look passive to me. He was pacing around my living room, kicking at the corner of the rug. I can't lend you $5,000, he said into the phone. I have alimony payments, you know that. Look, just sell some jewelry or something. I'm at the house. I'm getting my golf clubs. I'm not leaving them here if he's going scorched earth. He was there to retrieve his golf clubs. He had been storing his personal items in my house. The audacity was breathtaking. Yep, Brian said. Look, we need to cool it for a bit. If he's going to lawyers, I don't want to be named in anything. I have a review coming up next month. He hung up. He looked around the room, a sneer on his face. He walked over to the mantel and picked up a framed photo of my grandfather. He looked at it, then placed it face down. Loser, he muttered. He walked toward the basement door, presumably to get his clubs. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. He was in my house. He was insulting my family. He was abandoning Sarah the moment the money dried up. I could have called the police. I could have reported a burglary. But that would be too quick. That would be a simple arrest. I wanted something more permanent. I watched him leave the house 5 minutes later, a set of expensive Callaway clubs slung over his shoulder. He threw them into his trunk and drove away. I picked up my phone. I opened the email draft I had prepared. To Board of Directors. Attachment, Mitchell_Carter_ethics_violation. PDF, I added a new paragraph to the email body. Please also find attached video evidence of Mr. Carter conducting personal business during company hours and utilizing client properties for personal storage, creating potential liability for the firm. I didn't have video of the client properties yet, but I knew where to look. The apartment they rented was managed by a subsidiary of their own firm. That was the conflict of interest. I hit send. The email whooshed away. I started my car. The engine rumbled to life. Phase 2 was complete. The accounts were frozen. The anxiety was planted. The lover had revealed his cowardice. Now it was time for the workplace to become a battlefield. I drove toward the city. I had nowhere to be, and yet I had never had a clearer destination. I was going to watch their world burn, not from the front row, but from the control room. As I merged onto the highway, I saw a billboard for the agency Sarah and Brian worked for. Trust. Integrity. Home. I smiled. A cold, hard smile. Let's audit that integrity, I whispered. The road ahead was long, but I had plenty of fuel. Unlike Sarah, the architecture of modern ruin is often composed of steel and reinforced glass. There's a specific kind of cruelty to the design of contemporary office buildings, particularly those in the high-stakes world of luxury real estate. They're built to be transparent, to project an image of openness and clarity, yet they are designed to be impenetrable fortresses of ego. Zenith Real Estate Group occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming tower in the Loop, a structure that looked down upon the city with the haughty indifference of a monarch. From the street level, the pedestrians were nothing more than ants navigating a concrete grid. From where I sat, however, the executives in the tower were the specimens in a jar. I had positioned myself in a cafe directly across the street from the Zenith building. It was a strategic vantage point on the 2nd floor, offering a direct line of sight into the lobby and, more importantly, the glass-walled conference rooms that lined the perimeter of the 20th floor. I had brought my binoculars, a pair of high-powered optics I usually use for birdwatching on the weekends, a hobby Sarah had always found boring. "Why watch birds?" she would say, "when you can't interact with them." She never understood that observation is the purest form of interaction. To observe is to know, and to know is to control. Today, I was not watching sparrows or cardinals. I was watching vultures. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. My email to the board of directors and the ethics compliance officer had been sent exactly 45 minutes ago. In the corporate world, 45 minutes is the golden window. It is the time it takes for an email to be read, for a panic attack to set in, for legal counsel to be summoned, and for the guillotine to be sharpened. I sipped my black coffee. It was cold, but I didn't mind. My focus was absolute. I saw Sarah arrive. Her entrance was not the triumphant arrival of a top-tier agent. She was running. Her white SUV was nowhere to be seen. She must have taken a rideshare or a taxi, likely paid for with the last scrap of cash she had in her purse or by begging Brian. She looked disheveled. From this distance, I could see that her hair, usually sprayed into an immaculate helmet of blonde perfection, was windblown. Her stride was uneven. She was checking her phone constantly as she pushed through the revolving doors. She was late. In her industry, punctuality is the first currency of trust. Being late on a day when you are already under the microscope is fatal. 10 minutes later, I saw Brian. He did not run. He strolled. He wore a camel-colored trench coat and sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. He moved with the unearned confidence of a man who believes he is the protagonist of every story. He stopped at the lobby coffee cart, taking his time to order. He laughed at something the barista said. It was a performance. He was trying to project normalcy. He didn't know yet that the script had been rewritten. He didn't know that I had included the logs of his unauthorized use of company property in the dossier. He thought he was walking into work to close a deal. He was walking into an autopsy. I shifted my gaze up to the 20th floor. The fishbowl, that was what they called the main executive conference room. It was a corner office encased entirely in floor-to-ceiling glass, visible to the entire floor and, thanks to the architecture, to anyone with a good pair of binoculars across the street. It was designed to intimidate clients with views of the skyline. Today, it would serve a different purpose. I unlocked my phone. I had set up a Google alert for Zenith Real Estate. Nothing yet. Corporate scandals usually take a few hours to leak to the press, but the internal combustion happens instantly. I opened my laptop. I wasn't just waiting, I was monitoring. I had access to a shared cloud folder that Sarah had foolishly left synced to our home network. It contained her work calendar. 10:30 a.m. Strategy meeting with B. Carter and clients. The Henderson listing. That meeting was not going to happen. At 10:25 a.m., the movement began. I saw 3 figures enter the fishbowl. They were not clients. I recognized the silhouette of the company's CEO, a stern man named Marcus Thorne whom I had met at a Christmas party 2 years ago. He was a man who valued loyalty above profit, which was a rare trait. Beside him were 2 others in dark suits. Legal. You can always spot corporate legal counsel by the way they carry their folders, clutched to the chest like shields. Thorne was pacing. He was gesturing at a document on the table. The dossier. My dossier. A moment later, a secretary appeared at the door. She spoke to Thorne, then retreated. She was the messenger, the summoner. I zoomed in with the binoculars. The image was shaky, but clear enough. I saw the door open again. Sarah walked in first. She looked small. The expansive room swallowed her. She placed her bag on a chair, but Thorne gestured for her to leave it. She froze. That was the first sign. Don't get comfortable. Brian entered a moment later. He strode in with a smile, extending a hand to Thorne. Thorne did not take it. Thorne stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a statue of judgment. Brian's hand hovered in the air for a second, then dropped. The smile vanished. He looked at Sarah, then at the lawyers. He pulled out a chair to sit, but Thorne raised a finger. Stunt. They were being court-martialed. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The body language of a corporate execution is universal. It is a silent film of accusation and denial. Thorne picked up a stack of papers, the printed emails, the expense reports, the photos of the car. He threw them onto the polished mahogany table. The papers slid across the surface, scattering like dead leaves. Sarah flinched. She reached for a page. She read it. Her hand went to her mouth. It was likely the page detailing the consulting fees that paid for their love nest. She looked at Brian. Her expression was not one of love. It was one of confusion and terror. She started speaking rapidly, her hands moving in erratic, pleading gestures. She was explaining. She was rationalizing. She was probably saying it was a mistake, an accounting error, a misunderstanding. Thorne wasn't buying it. He pointed at the screen on the wall. A projector flickered to life. I couldn't see the screen clearly from my angle, but I knew what was on it. The time-stamped logs. The proof that they had prioritized their affair over their fiduciary duties to their clients. In real estate, steering a client to a property to get a quick commission rather than the best deal is a violation of the license. It is illegal. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The turning of the tide. Brian stepped forward. He was not looking at Thorne. He was looking at Sarah. He was pointing at her. I watched the pantomime of betrayal unfold with a grim fascination. Brian was animated. He was shaking his head, his face twisted in a mask of righteous indignation. He was gesturing at himself, then pointing an accusatory finger at Sarah. He was selling a new narrative. I could almost hear the words, "She made me do it. She handled the paperwork. I just signed where she told me. I didn't know about the embezzlement. I'm a victim here." It was the classic prisoner's dilemma, and Brian had defected immediately. Sarah stood there, stunned. She looked at the man she had destroyed her marriage for, the man she had bought a car for, the man she had risked everything for, and he was feeding her to the wolves to save his own tailored suit. She began to cry, not the pretty, manipulative tears she used on me to get her way. These were the ugly, heaving sobs of total collapse. She turned to Brian, shouting something. She grabbed his arm. He shook her off violently, physically distancing himself, stepping behind the lawyers as if seeking their protection from her. Thorne had seen enough. He said one word. I saw his lips move. Enough. He pointed to the door. Security guards entered. 2 of them, burly men in blazers. They didn't rough them up. This was a corporate office, not a bar. But the implication was clear. They were being escorted. Brian tried to argue one last time. He tried to appeal to Thorne man-to-man. Thorne turned his back. The ultimate dismissal. They were led out of the fishbowl. The rest of the office floor, the dozens of employees in the open-plan cubicles, had stopped working. They were standing, watching. The entire colony was witnessing the exile of the infected drones. I lowered the binoculars. My eyes were tired. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. It was done. The career she had built for 10 years, the reputation she valued more than her vows, was gone in 20 minutes. I packed up my things. I left a generous tip for the waitress who had let me occupy the table for 2 hours. I walked out into the cool Chicago air. The wind had a bite to it, but it felt cleansing. I walked a few blocks to a small park and sat on a bench. I needed to check the digital fallout. I opened the LinkedIn app on my phone. I searched for Zenith Real Estate. A new post from the company page, posted 3 minutes ago. Zenith Real Estate Group takes ethical standards seriously. We are committed to transparency and fiduciary responsibility. We are conducting an internal restructuring to better serve our clients. Corporate speak for, we just fired the bad apples. I checked Sarah's profile. It was still there, but soon it would be scrubbed. My phone rang. It was Sarah. I looked at the screen. I had blocked her earlier, but I had unblocked her for this moment. I needed to hear the aftermath. I needed to confirm the data. I answered. David. He blamed me, she sobbed. Her voice was broken, unrecognizable. David, he blamed me for everything. I remained silent. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to fill it with her confession. They fired us, she choked out. Security escorted us out like criminals. Everyone was watching. My assistant, the interns, everyone. Marcus called us thieves. He said he's reporting us to the licensing board. David, I'm going to lose my license. That seems like a probable outcome, I said calmly. You don't understand, she shrieked, the panic rising again. Brian. He told them I forged his signature. He told them I seduced him to get access to his client list. He lied. He threw me away, David, after everything I did for him. He is a liability, Sarah, I said. I could have told you that. A man who cheats with you will cheat on you. And a man who cheats on his wife will cheat on his business partner. You invested in a volatile asset. How can you talk like that? She wailed. My life is over. I have no job. I have no money. I have no car. Brian took the keys to the Mercedes. He said it's in his name, so it's his car, even though I paid for it. He drove off and left me on the sidewalk. He is technically correct regarding the title of the vehicle, I noted. If you registered it in his name to hide it from me, it is his legal property. That was a poor strategic decision. Stop being an auditor, she screamed. Stop being a robot. I am your wife. You are my wife, I corrected. Now you are a defendant in a potential embezzlement suit and a respondent in a divorce proceeding. The status has changed. David, please, she dropped her voice to a whimper. I have nowhere to go. I can't go to the apartment. The company owns the management firm. They changed the locks already. They said it was company housing and we were unauthorized occupants. I'm on the street. Please, can I come home? Just for tonight? I need to figure this out. The request hung in the air. A plea for sanctuary. A plea to return to the safety she had willingly torched. The house is being prepared for sale, Sarah, I said. And as for coming home, I don't think that's a good idea. You see, I've already notified the neighbors about the situation. I felt I owed them an explanation for the police presence that might occur later. Police. She sounded faint. The company will likely file charges for the misuse of funds, I said. And I have a meeting with my own forensic accountant this afternoon to discuss the unauthorized withdrawals from our savings. If you come to the house, you might find it unwelcoming. You planned this, she whispered. You planned all of this. I audited the situation, I said. I found discrepancies. I corrected them. Good luck, Sarah. I hung up. I sat on the bench for a long time. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, heavy exhaustion. It wasn't triumph. Triumph implies a victory in a contest. This wasn't a contest. This was a demolition. I needed to move to the next phase. The personal assets were frozen. The career was destroyed. The lover was exposed as a traitor. Now, I had to ensure that the recovery was impossible. I had to ensure that she couldn't spin this into a victim narrative. I walked to my car. I had one more stop to make today. I drove to the suburbs, but not to our neighborhood. I drove to the upscale subdivision where Brian lived. Or rather, where Brian's wife lived. I had found her name in the public records. Emily Carter, a pediatrician, a woman who likely spent her days healing children while her husband spent his days spending her money and mine. I didn't plan to confront her. That would be messy, but I had prepared a package. A simple manila envelope. Inside was a copy of the dossier I had sent to the office, along with a polite note. Dr. Carter, I believe you and I have shared liability. I thought you should have the full picture before he comes home today with a story about being laid off due to budget cuts. A friend. I pulled up to the mailbox. It was a large brick structure at the end of a long driveway. The house was massive, far bigger than mine. Brian had been playing the part of the wealthy tycoon, supported by his wife's success and his own fraud. I slid the envelope into the mailbox and raised the red flag. I drove away. Brian would be heading home now, likely rehearsing his lies. He would tell Emily that the company was downsizing, that he was a victim of office politics. He would try to lean on her income while he looked for new opportunities. He would try to survive like a parasite finding a new host. But when Emily opened that mailbox, the parasite would be exposed. She would see the hotel receipts. She would see the jewelry purchases. She would see the text messages where he mocked her working hours. I was not just fighting my own war. I was arming the allies I didn't even know I had. My phone pinged. An email notification. From HR Department, Zenith Real Estate. To David Mitchell. Subject: Investigation regarding Sarah Mitchell and Brian Carter. Dear Mr. Mitchell, thank you for bringing these matters to our attention. We have taken immediate action. Please be advised that our legal team may contact you for further cooperation regarding the restitution of company funds. We appreciate your discretion in this matter. Restitution. That was an interesting word. It meant they were going to come after Sarah for the money she stole. Money she didn't have. She would be bankrupt within the month. I felt a vibration in my pocket again. Another call. This time, the number was unknown. I let it go to voicemail. I checked the message a minute later. It was Brian. Listen, buddy. His voice was tight, aggressive, but underlying it was pure fear. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're messing with the wrong guy. You sent that stuff to the board? You ruined me. I'm going to sue you for defamation. I'm going to take everything you have. You hear me? You're dead meat. I deleted the voicemail. Defamation requires the statement to be false. I had only provided truth. And as for suing me, lawyers cost money. Retainers cost money. Brian was about to find out that his wife was freezing his accounts just as I had frozen Sarah's. I drove back toward the city center. I had a meeting with a realtor, a different agency, obviously. I was putting the house on the market tomorrow. I wanted it sold fast. I wanted the physical structure of our marriage liquidated and converted into cash. I pulled into the parking lot of the realtor's office. As I turned off the engine, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked different. The softness around the eyes was gone. The hesitation was gone. I looked like a man who had survived a crash and walked away from the wreckage without a scratch, leaving the vehicle burning behind him. I walked into the realtor's office. "Hi, I'm David Mitchell," I said to the receptionist. "I have an appointment to discuss an urgent listing." "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. Right this way." I sat down in the plush chair. The realtor, a sharp woman named Karen, smiled at me. "So, tell me about the property," she said. "What is the motivation for selling?" "Relocation," I said smoothly. "I'm moving on to a new chapter. I want a quick sale. As is." "And your wife? Will she be joining us for the signing?" "My wife is unavailable," I said. "I have the power of attorney for the sale." Technically, I didn't have a power of attorney, but I had a court order pending that would grant me control over the asset liquidation due to her financial misconduct. The law is a powerful tool when you're the one holding the pen. "Understood," Karen said. "Well, looking at the specs, it's a beautiful home. We should have no trouble moving it." "It has good bones," I said, "but the interior needs to be gutted." She laughed, thinking I was joking about renovation. "I'm serious," I said. "There are memories in the walls that need to be removed." As we went through the paperwork, my mind drifted back to Sarah. She was probably sitting on a curb somewhere in the Loop, watching the commuters go home to their families. She was alone in a city of millions. I felt a twinge of pity. It was small, like a static shock, but it was there. We had been happy once, or I thought we were. But then I remembered the safe. I remembered the ritual. I remembered the way she took off the ring, the symbol of my devotion, and locked it away in the dark so she could be free. She wanted freedom? I had given it to her. She was now free of her job, free of her husband, free of her lover, free of her home. She was completely, utterly free. And freedom, as she was learning, is a very cold place when you have no shelter. I signed the listing agreement. "Excellent," Karen said. "We'll get the sign up in the yard tomorrow." "Make a big sign," I said. I left the office. The sun was beginning to set, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of bruised orange and gray. I checked my spreadsheet on my phone. Phase 3, corporate collapse complete. Phase 4, the war of attrition. This was the phase where the reality of the legal system would crush them. The divorce filings, the lawsuits, the debt collectors. I wasn't done yet. I had taken their present. Now, I was going to take their future. I dialed my lawyer. "It's David," I said. "File the motion. Cruel and inhuman treatment, adultery, dissipation of assets, and serve Brian with a subpoena for deposition. I want him under oath." You want to depose the paramour? The lawyer asked. That's aggressive, David. Usually people just settle. I don't want a settlement, I said, my voice flat. I want a transcript. I want him to have to admit on the record, under penalty of perjury, exactly what he did and how much of my money he spent. I want it in black and white. All right, the lawyer said. We'll serve him tomorrow. Good. I hung up. The city lights were turning on, one by one. Millions of lights. Millions of lives. Somewhere out there, Sarah was realizing that the darkness was falling, and she had lost the code to the light. I started my car and drove into the night. I had a quiet dinner planned. Alone. Peaceful. Honest. The food would taste better tonight. Truth always adds a certain flavor. The legal system is not designed for swift justice. It is designed for endurance. It is a machine that grinds slowly, fed by paper, billable hours, and the patience of those who seek to use it. If the events of the first week were a blitzkrieg, a rapid, overwhelming strike that decimated Sarah's defenses, the weeks that followed were a siege. This was the war of attrition. The objective was no longer to surprise the enemy, but to starve them out, to wait until their resources were depleted and their will was broken. I had the resources. I had the will. And, most importantly, I had the documentation. 3 weeks had passed since the day I walked out of the house. I was still living in the hotel, though I had moved to a suite with a kitchenette. It was a sterile existence, devoid of personal touches, but I found comfort in the minimalism. There were no memories in the hotel furniture. There were no ghosts in the closet. My days were spent working remotely for my firm, who had been surprisingly understanding given the complex family legal matters I had cited, and my evenings were spent with my legal team. I had hired Robert Vance. He was not the loudest lawyer in Chicago, nor the most expensive, but he was the most meticulous. He was a forensic accountant by trade before he passed the bar. We spoke the same language. We understood that in a divorce, as in an audit, the story is always in the numbers. Sarah, predictably, had gone a different route. Desperation breeds poor strategy. Through the grapevine of our mutual acquaintances, who were rapidly dwindling as people chose sides, I learned she had retained the services of Marcus Gold. Gold was a billboard lawyer. His face was plastered on bus stops with slogans like "Fighting for Your Future." He was known for being aggressive, loud, and theatrical. He specialized in settlements, in scaring the opposing party into paying out just to make the noise stop. He did not know he was up against a man who found silence preferable to noise. On a Tuesday morning, under a sky the color of wet slate, I sat in the conference room of Vance's office. The mahogany table was covered in binders. My resolution spreadsheet had grown into a comprehensive dossier. Gold filed a motion for emergency spousal support, Vance said, sliding a document toward me, and a motion to lift the freeze on the joint accounts. He's claiming financial abuse. He's painting a picture of you as a controlling tyrant who cut off his dependent wife without warning, leaving her destitute. I picked up the document. The language was flowery, filled with adjectives like cruel, malicious, and coercive. It described Sarah as a devoted homemaker who had been blindsided. It conveniently omitted the 14 months of infidelity, the embezzlement of funds, and the existence of Brian Carter. It is a creative piece of fiction, I said, placing the paper back on the table. Does he have a case? On the surface, yes, Vance nodded. The courts generally frown upon one spouse unilaterally cutting off funds before a judge orders it. It looks like retaliation. Gold is banking on the judge seeing a woman with no money and a husband with a healthy savings account and ordering you to write a check immediately. He wants to bleed you. He knows that if he can get the cash flowing again, Sarah can sustain the fight. And the counter-argument? I asked. The counter-argument is that the freeze was not retaliation, but preservation, Vance said. We have to prove that she was actively dissipating marital assets, that if you hadn't frozen the accounts, the money would be gone. We have the records of the consulting fees, I said. We have the car. We do, Vance agreed. But Gold is going to argue that those were lifestyle choices you condoned, or at least ignored. He's going to say you knew about the spending and only cared when you decided to leave. He's going to try to make the infidelity irrelevant to the finances. I leaned back in the chair. I looked at the city skyline through the window. He wants to separate the moral failure from the financial failure. Exactly, Vance said. In Illinois, the court divides property equitably. Misconduct usually doesn't factor in unless it has a direct economic impact. Gold is going to argue that her affair is a personal matter, not a financial one. He wants half the house, half the retirement, and alimony for 5 years. I felt the cold anger tighten in my chest. It wasn't about the money. I could make more money. It was about the principle. She wanted to be paid for the years she spent lying to me. Set the hearing, I said. Let's go to court. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. In the intervening days, the pressure mounted. I received emails from Sarah, sent from a new, free email account since her work address was terminated. They oscillated between pleading and venomous. David, they're going to evict me from this apartment. I'm sleeping on a friend's couch. Is this what you wanted? To see me homeless? Then, 2 hours later, you're going to pay for this. Marcus says you're breaking the law. We're going to take the house and your pension. You'll be the one in the street. I did not reply. I forwarded every email to Vance. They were exhibits. I also learned about Brian. The friend who provided the update was a former colleague of theirs who had survived the purge at Zenith. Apparently, Brian's wife, Emily, had not taken the revelation quietly. She hadn't just kicked him out. She had changed the locks on their gated estate, and more importantly, she had filed for a restraining order, citing his erratic behavior when he tried to force his way back in. Brian was currently living in a motel near the airport, driving the car that my money had paid for. The alliance between Sarah and Brian had fractured immediately under the weight of reality. They were not Romeo and Juliet. They were two rats in a sinking barrel, climbing over each other to breathe. Monday arrived. The Cook County Courthouse was a monolith of gray stone and bureaucracy. The air inside smelled of floor wax and anxiety. I wore my darkest suit. I carried my briefcase. I walked with the steady, rhythmic pace of a man who knows exactly where he is going. We waited outside the courtroom. Sarah arrived with Marcus Gold. She looked different. The polished, glowing woman I had married was gone. In her place was someone brittle. She was wearing a modest dress, something she might have worn to church 5 years ago. It was a calculated choice, Gold's idea, no doubt, to look demure, sympathetic the victim. But her eyes were red-rimmed. Her hands, clutching a tissue, were shaking. When she saw me, she flinched. For a second, I saw a flash of the old Sarah, the one who looked to me for safety. But then Gold whispered something in her ear, and her expression hardened into a mask of resentment. Gold was shorter than I expected, with a tan that looked artificial and a suit that was slightly too loud for a courtroom. He looked me up and down, offering a smirk that was meant to be intimidating. I met his gaze and held it until he looked away. All rise. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than it looks on television. The judge, the Honorable Margaret Stone, was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and an expression of permanent fatigue. She had seen thousands of divorces. She had heard every lie, every accusation, every sob story. Gold started immediately. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, and launched into his opening statement. Your Honor, we are here today because my client, Mrs. Mitchell, has been the victim of a calculated campaign of financial terror. Her husband, a wealthy auditor, has used his professional skills to systematically cut off her access to food, shelter, and basic necessities. He locked her out of the marital home, froze the joint accounts, and left her with nothing, solely because he decided the marriage was over. This is not a divorce. This is a siege. We ask that the court order the immediate unfreezing of assets, the payment of $10,000 in emergency support, and exclusive possession of the marital residence to Mrs. Mitchell until the trial concludes. He was good. He made me sound like a monster. He painted Sarah as a helpless flower crushed by the boot of a corporate machine. Judge Stone looked at me. Mr. Vance, your client's response? Vance stood up. He was calm, his voice low and measured. Your Honor, Mr. Mitchell did not freeze the accounts to punish his wife. He froze them to prevent the theft of marital assets. In the 12 months preceding the separation, Mrs. Mitchell, without her husband's knowledge, transferred over $40,000 of community funds to a third party. She purchased a luxury vehicle for a paramour. She rented a secret apartment. Mr. Mitchell is simply trying to ensure there is something left to divide. Objection, Gold shouted. Allegations of infidelity are irrelevant to the emergency support motion. My client needs to eat. The objection goes to the dissipation of assets, Judge Stone said, looking over her glasses. If the money was spent on non-marital pursuits, it is relevant. Mr. Vance, do you have proof of this dissipation? We do, Your Honor, Vance said. He handed a thick binder to the bailiff. Exhibit A. Bank records showing transfers to Horizon Partners, a shell company for the apartment rental. Exhibit B. The title transfer for a Mercedes-Benz, purchased with fund from the home renovation savings account, registered to Mr. Brian Carter. Sarah sank lower in her chair. Gold whispered furiously to her. Your Honor, Gold countered, not missing a beat. Mrs. Mitchell disputes the characterization of these expenses. The apartment was a workspace. She is a real estate agent. She needs staging areas. And Mr. Carter was a business partner. These were business investments that Mr. Mitchell is now twisting to suit his narrative. Furthermore, even if the court finds these expenses questionable, that is a matter for the final trial. Right now, a woman is homeless. You cannot punish her for alleged bad business decisions by starving her. The judge frowned. Gold had found a foothold. He has a point, Mr. Vance. I can't leave her destitute based on disputed business expenses. I am inclined to order a temporary stipend. I felt a tightening in my gut. Sarah was going to get a win. If she got a stipend, she could drag this out for months. She could live on my dime while Gold threw paperwork at me. I touched Vance's arm. I slid a USB drive across the table to him. This was the nuclear option. We had discussed holding it back for the trial, but the war was happening now. Your Honor, Vance said, before you rule, we have one more piece of evidence regarding the business nature of the relationship with Mr. Carter and the intent behind the spending. We believe this goes to the core of the dissipation claim. It proves that this was not bad business, but a conspiracy to defraud the marital estate. Conspiracy? Judge Stone raised an eyebrow. That is a strong word, counselor. We have audio and video logs from the home security system, Vance said. Specifically, from the living room of the marital residence, dated 2 months ago. Sarah's head snapped up. Her face went pale. She looked at Gold. Gold looked confused. He didn't know. She hadn't told him. Mrs. Mitchell, Gold whispered loudly. What is on that tape? I don't know, she stammered. We just talked. May we play a clip? Vance asked. The judge nodded. Proceed. Vance plugged the drive into the court's AV system. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. The audio filled the room. It was a wide-angle shot of our living room. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was away at a conference. Sarah was on the sofa, a glass of wine in her hand. Brian was pacing in front of the fireplace. My fireplace. The image was clear. The sound was crisp. Brian, he's going to notice eventually, Sarah. You can't keep hiding the withdrawals as contractor fees. The guy's an auditor, for Christ's sake. Sarah, laughing, David, please. He looks at numbers all day, but he never looks at us. He's blind. Besides, by the time he figures it out, we'll have enough for the down payment in Cabo. I just need a few more months to drain the equity line. Brian, and if he catches on? Sarah, then I'll cry. I'll tell him I have a gambling problem or something. He's soft, Brian. He'll try to fix me. He'll never leave. We can bleed him dry, and he'll thank us for it. The recording stopped. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I looked at Sarah. She was staring at the table, her hands covering her face. She was shaking violently. I looked at Marcus Gold. The aggressive, loud lawyer was sitting perfectly still. His mouth was slightly open. He looked at his client with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. He realized he had been lied to. He had walked into a courtroom and argued that she was a victim, only to have her voice on tape calling her husband soft and plotting to bleed him dry. His credibility was incinerated. Judge Stone took off her glasses. She rubbed her eyes. When she looked up, her expression was ice cold. "Mr. Gold," the judge said, her voice quiet but dangerous. "Did you know about this recording?" "No, Your Honor," Gold said, standing up. "I was completely unaware of the existence of this conversation." "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge turned her gaze to Sarah. "You stood in my courtroom and claimed you were a victim of financial abuse. You claimed these were business expenses. And yet, I just heard you plotting to defraud your husband and mocking his trust." Sarah tried to speak, but only a choked sob came out. "The motion for emergency support is denied," Judge Stone ruled, slamming her gavel down. "The freeze on the assets remains in place until a full forensic accounting is completed. Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Mitchell exclusive possession of the marital residence effective immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, you have 24 hours to remove any remaining personal effects, supervised by a court officer." "But, Your Honor," Gold tried, feebly, "she has nowhere to go." "Then perhaps she should go to Cabo," the judge said dryly. "Next case." We walked out of the courtroom. The hallway felt wider, brighter. Sarah was sitting on a bench outside, weeping. Gold was standing over her, shouting in a hushed whisper. "You lied to me," Gold was saying. "You told me he was abusive. You didn't tell me you were on tape planning a heist. Do you know what you just did? You destroyed your own case. I can't defend this." "I didn't know," Sarah wailed. "I didn't know the camera recorded audio. David never used it." She looked up and saw me standing there. Vance was packing his briefcase, looking pleased. Sarah stood up. She wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. She walked toward me. "David," she said. Her voice was trembling. "David, please. That was just talk. We were drunk. I didn't mean it." I looked at her. I saw the woman I had shared a decade of my life with. I searched for any feeling, anger, love, hate. There was nothing, just a hollow recognition of a stranger. "You meant it, Sarah," I said. "You meant every word. You called me soft. You said I would never leave." "I was wrong," she whispered. "I was so wrong. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've lost everything. Brian is gone. My job is gone. My friends won't talk to me. Please, don't do this. Don't leave me with nothing." "I'm not leaving you with nothing," I said. "I'm leaving you with the consequences of your own audit. You wanted to drain the equity? You wanted to bleed me dry? You broke the contract, Sarah. And in my world, when you break the contract, you pay the penalty." "David," she cried out as I turned to walk away. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" I stopped. I didn't turn around. "You're a resourceful woman, Sarah," I said. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. Just don't use my credit card." I walked to the elevator with Vance. The doors closed, shutting out the sound of her crying. "That went well," Vance said, checking his watch. "It went according to the data," I said. But the war wasn't over. The legal victory was just one battle. Now came the liquidation. I returned to the house that afternoon. I had the legal right to be there now, exclusive possession. I wanted to oversee the final clearing out before the "for sale" sign went up. The house felt like a tomb. The air was stale. I walked through the rooms. The living room, where the camera had recorded their betrayal. The kitchen, where we had cooked Thanksgiving dinners. I went to the safe. I opened it. The rings were still there. The note was still there. I took the rings out. I put them in my pocket. I would sell them. The proceeds would go to the legal fees. I heard a car pull up. I looked out the window. It was a beat-up sedan. Brian. He didn't come to the door. He sat in the car, staring at the house. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled shirt. He was watching the house he had tried to steal, the life he had tried to hijack. I walked out the front door and stood on the porch. I looked at him. He saw me. He started the engine, revving it aggressively, an impotent display of masculinity. He shouted something through the closed window, an obscenity I couldn't hear, and then peeled away, tires screeching. He was a ghost haunting a graveyard he had helped fill. I went back inside. My phone rang. It was the realtor. "David, good news," she said. "We have an offer. Cash buyer. They want to tear it down and build a modern farmhouse. They don't care about the interior condition." "Tear it down?" I asked. "Yes. They just want the lot. Is that a problem?" I looked around the living room. I looked at the spot on the couch where Sarah had sat and laughed about bleeding me dry. "No," I said. "That's not a problem. In fact, it's perfect. Great. I'll send the paperwork. I hung up, to tear it down, to raise it to the ground. It was the only way to truly cleanse the ledger. A write-off. Total depreciation. I spent the next few hours packing the last of my things. The books I wanted to keep, the few photos that didn't include Sarah. I worked methodically. As evening fell, I found myself in the master bedroom. I opened the closet. Sarah's clothes were gone. She must have taken them in her initial panic or during the supervised visit I hadn't attended. But something was left on the top shelf. A shoebox. I pulled it down. It wasn't locked. I opened it. Inside were letters. Old letters. Letters I had written to her when we were dating. Birthday cards. Anniversary cards. And photos. Photos of us from the beginning. Before the money. Before the cynicism. Before the betrayal. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a photo of us at a carnival, eating cotton candy. We looked so young. So stupidly happy. For the first time since the night I found the ring in the safe, I felt a crack in the armor. I felt a stinging in my eyes. Why? Why did she do it? Was I really that blind? Was I really that soft? I looked at the photo. The David in that picture believed in forever. The David sitting on the bed knew that forever was just a clause in a contract that could be voided for breach of terms. I took the photo. I walked to the bathroom. I took out a lighter I kept for candles. I held the corner of the photo to the flame. It curled, blackened, and vanished. I dropped the ash into the sink and washed it away. I didn't burn the whole box. That would be emotional. I simply closed the lid and put it in the trash pile. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked downstairs. I checked the camera. It was Emily Carter, Brian's wife. I opened the door. She was a tall woman, elegant, with eyes that were as cold and sharp as surgical steel. She was holding a large envelope. "David Mitchell?" she asked. "Dr. Carter," I said. "Please come in." She stepped into the foyer. She looked around, noting the boxes, the emptiness. "Moving out?" she asked. "Liquidating," I corrected. "Good word," she said. "I got your package. The dossier. I hope it was informative." "It was," she said. "Painfully so, but necessary. Thank you." "You're welcome." She held up the envelope she was carrying. I thought I should return the favor. "I've been doing some digging of my own since you opened my eyes." Brian was sloppy. He kept records on his laptop. He thought I wouldn't know the password. It was password. She let out a dry laugh. "I found emails," she said, "between Brian and Sarah, but also between Brian and a mortgage broker." "A mortgage broker?" I asked. "They weren't just going to buy a place in Cabo," she said. "They were trying to take out a second mortgage on your house. Fraudulently. Brian had practiced forging your signature. They had the paperwork ready to go. They were waiting for you to go on your next business trip." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty house. A second mortgage. They were going to leverage the house, take the cash, and leave me with the debt. It wasn't just skimming. It was grand larceny. "Here," she said, handing me the envelope. Copies of the unfiled applications. The forged signatures. The dates. I took the envelope. It felt heavy. "Why give me this?" I asked. "You could use it against Brian." "I have enough on Brian to bury him 10 times over," she said calmly. "I'm a doctor, David. I know how to excise a tumor. But Sarah is your problem. And I thought you might need this for the final nail in the coffin." "The divorce trial," I said. "This makes it a criminal matter," she said. "Forgery. Attempted bank fraud. If you hand this to the district attorney, she doesn't just lose the divorce. She goes to prison." I stared at the envelope. Prison. Sarah in an orange jumpsuit. Sarah behind bars. It was the ultimate destruction. It was the nuclear winter. "Why?" I asked Emily. "Why do you want her destroyed?" She looked at me, and her eyes softened just a fraction. "Because she knew he was married," Emily said. "She knew he had children. She came to my house once for a company barbecue. She smiled at my kids. She ate my food. And then she tried to steal their father and their college fund. I don't believe in mercy for people who smile while they hold a knife." She turned to leave. "Good luck, David. If you need a witness, call me." She walked out into the night. I stood in the foyer, holding the envelope. The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about freedom. Not the freedom Sarah wanted, the freedom to be single, but the literal freedom of movement. If I gave this to the police, Sarah would be arrested. She would have a criminal record. Her life would be irrevocably over. I walked back to the kitchen. I placed the envelope on the counter next to the keys. The house was quiet. The war of attrition was over. The enemy had no food, no ammo, and no shelter. And now, I held the codes to launch the final missile. I looked at the envelope. Attempted bank fraud. I thought about the court today. Her tears. Her plea. Don't leave me with nothing. I picked up the envelope. The auditor in me said, file it. A crime is a crime. The variance must be corrected. The man in me, the ghost of the husband, said, is it enough? Is she punished enough? I put the envelope in my briefcase. I wouldn't decide tonight. I would sleep on it. I walked out of the house, locking the door for the last time. The for sale sign would be up tomorrow. The demolition crew would be here in a month. I got in my car. I drove away from the cul-de-sac. As I turned onto the main road, I saw a figure walking on the sidewalk. A woman pulling a small rolling suitcase, head down against the wind. It was Sarah. She was walking toward the bus stop. I slowed the car. I watched her. She looked broken, defeated, a shadow of the vibrant woman she used to be. I could stop. I could roll down the window. I could offer her a ride. I could show her the envelope and watch the last of her hope die in her eyes. But I didn't. I pressed the accelerator. I drove past her. I didn't look back in the mirror. The audit was closed. The findings were conclusive. The only thing left was to sign off on the final report. And tomorrow, I would write the last chapter. The chapter where the numbers finally reach zero. The sound of a pen scratching against paper is distinct. It is a dry, final sound. In a title company office, surrounded by faux leather chairs and potted ferns that have never seen the sun, that sound is the guillotine blade of a marriage. I signed my name for the last time on the deed transfer documents. David Mitchell. The signature looked the same as it always had, sharp, angular, precise, but the hand holding the pen felt lighter. With each stroke of black ink, I was shedding weight. The house was no longer an asset. It was no longer a liability. It was simply a structure of wood and brick that now belonged to a developer who saw more value in the land beneath it than the memories inside it. The buyer was not present. It was a cash transaction handled by attorneys. That suited me. I had no desire to shake the hand of the man who would bulldoze my past. I handed the pen back to the escrow officer, a woman with a kind face who seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. She didn't offer congratulations. She simply slid a check across the table. It was my share of the equity, minus the rush fees, minus the legal costs. It was a substantial number, yet it felt abstract. It wasn't money. It was the severance package from a decade-long employment in a failed enterprise. I walked out of the office building and into the late afternoon sun. Chicago was transitioning into autumn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dried leaves and exhaust fumes. Most men in my position might have gone to a bar. They might have sought the bottom of a bottle to numb the strange, hollow ache of finality. But I am an auditor. When a file is closed, you do not mourn it. You archive it and move to the next. However, there was one final item on the checklist. A physical handover. The keys. Technically, I could have left them with the attorney. But Sarah had reached out. She had sent a message through Vance, my lawyer. A simple request, stripped of the venom and desperation that had characterized the last month. She wanted to retrieve a box of personal items she had left in the attic, things that were not part of the court-ordered removal. And she wanted to say goodbye. Vance had advised against it. He called it an unnecessary emotional risk. But I overruled him. An audit is not complete until the final walkthrough is conducted. I needed to see the result of the process. I needed to verify the state of the entity after liquidation. I drove to the house. The traffic was heavy, the usual gridlock of commuters rushing home to families, to dinners, to lives that were still intact. I navigated the familiar streets with a sense of detachment. I passed the grocery store where we used to shop on Sundays. I passed the park where we once talked about having children, a conversation she had skillfully deflected for years. Now I knew why. You don't build a nursery when you are planning an escape route. I pulled into the cul-de-sac. The for sale sign had a sold sticker slapped across it diagonally. It looked like a bandage on a wound. The house stood silent. The curtains were gone. The windows looked like dark, unblinking eyes. I parked in the driveway, my tires crunching on the few fallen leaves that I hadn't swept. I wouldn't be sweeping them again. That was the developer's problem now. I unlocked the front door. The sound of the deadbolt retracting was loud in the stillness. I stepped inside. The emptiness of a house is a physical force. It presses against your eardrums. Without furniture to absorb the sound, my footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. The living room, once filled with the plush beige sofa and the Persian rug she loved, was a vast expanse of polished wood. The walls, stripped of art, revealed the subtle discolorations where the frames had hung, ghostly outlines of a life that had been curated but not truly lived. I walked to the kitchen. The refrigerator was gone. The space where it stood was a gaping mouth, revealing the dust bunnies and an old, forgotten outlet cover. It was ugly. It was honest. I checked my watch. She was late. Consistently inconsistent. I went to the study. This was the epicenter. This was where the mechanism had been engaged. The desk was gone. The bookshelf was gone. The only thing remaining was the wall safe. It was built into the structure. I couldn't take it, and the new owners would likely demolish the wall anyway. It stood open, the door slightly ajar. I had cleared it out completely. The cash, the documents, the rings. All gone. I heard a car outside. I walked to the window. A taxi had pulled up. Sarah stepped out. She didn't look like the woman I had married, nor did she look like the frantic, hysterical woman from the courtroom. She looked diminished. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that looked slightly too big for her, as if she had shrunk in the wash. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, no longer the intricate, salon-perfect style she used to wear as armor. She carried a cardboard box, flattened, under her arm. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the house. I couldn't read her expression. Was it regret? Nostalgia? Or just the calculation of what she had lost? She walked to the door. I didn't wait for her to knock. I opened it. We stood there, separated by the threshold. The dynamic had shifted so profoundly that I barely recognized the energy between us. For years, she had been the sun, radiant, demanding, the center of gravity. I had been the planet orbiting her, grateful for the warmth. Now, she was a satellite that had fallen out of orbit, cold and dark, and I was the immovable object. David, she said. Her voice was soft, raspy. Sarah, I acknowledged. You have 30 minutes. The new owners take possession at 6 p.m. She flinched at the coldness of the timestamp, but she nodded. I know. I needed to get the box from the attic. My grandmother's ornaments. I forgot them. They're on the kitchen counter, I said. I brought them down for you. She looked surprised. Oh, thank you. She stepped inside. She looked around the empty living room, her eyes tracing the walls, the floorboards, the ceiling. It looks so small, she whispered. Without the furniture. It looks tiny. It's 2,500 square feet, I said. The dimensions haven't changed. Only your perspective. She walked to the center of the room and hugged her arms around herself. I heard they're tearing it down. Yes, that seems wasteful. It's efficient, I corrected. The structure is compromised. The foundation has cracks. It's better to start over than to patch up something that is fundamentally broken. She looked at me sharply. She knew I wasn't talking about the architecture. I didn't think you could be this cruel, David, she said. I knew you were precise. I knew you were logical. But this, the way you dismantled everything, it was surgical. It was necessary, I said. You introduced a virus into the system, Sarah. I simply ran the antivirus program. The quarantine was automatic. I'm not a virus, she said, her voice trembling. I'm a human being. I made a mistake. You made a series of investments, I said, leaning against the doorframe. You invested time, money, and emotion into a secondary portfolio. You bet against our marriage. You shorted the stock, hoping to cash out when it crashed. You just didn't expect the market to correct itself so violently. She closed her eyes. A single tear escaped, tracking through the minimal makeup she wore. Brian. He's gone. I am aware. He called me yesterday, she said, opening her eyes. He was crying. He wanted to borrow money. He wanted me to ask you to stop the lawsuit from his wife. Can you believe that? He thought I had influence over you. He overestimated your position, I said. He's a coward, she said bitterly. You were right. He threw me under the bus the second it got hard. I gave up everything for a man who didn't even have the courage to pack his own bags. She looked at me, a flicker of something pleading in her eyes. I miss us, David. I miss who we were before all this. Before I got bored. Before I got greedy. You miss the safety, I said. You miss the bills being paid. You miss the reputation. You don't miss me. You miss the infrastructure I provided. That's not true, she stepped closer. I remember the good times. Napa. The Christmas parties. We were a good team. We were a fraudulent entity, I said. The books were cooked, Sarah. I just didn't audit them until it was too late. She stopped. She realized that charm would not work. Tears would not work. Nostalgia would not work. The man standing before her was not the husband she could manipulate. I was the auditor, and the audit was closed. She walked to the kitchen and picked up the box of ornaments. She held it to her chest like a shield. I have one question, she said. She turned back to me. The setting sun was casting long, distorted shadows across the empty floor. Proceed. The code, she said. The new code on the safe. That night, when I came home, when I was locked out, I tried everything. Your birthday, my birthday, our address, the date we met. Nothing worked. She took a breath, her eyes locking onto mine. It's been driving me crazy, she admitted. Even with everything else falling apart, that number, it haunts me. It was the moment I knew it was over. The moment I knew you were smarter than me. What was it? What was the code, David? I looked at her. This was the closure she wanted. She wanted to solve the puzzle. She wanted to believe that if she had just guessed the right numbers, maybe she could have opened the safe, put the ring back, and we would still be living our lie. She didn't understand that the lock wasn't on the safe. It was on her choices. Do you really want to know? I asked. Yes, she whispered. Please. 10. 12, I said. She frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. 1012? October 12th? She ran the date through her mind. I could see the gears turning. She was looking for a happy memory, a vacation date, a promotion. Then her face went slack. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her as pale as the drywall behind her. Her mouth opened slightly, a gasp stuck in her throat. My father, she breathed. That was the day my father died. Yes, I said calmly. Why? She asked, her voice cracking. Why would you use that? That was the worst day of my life. Because he was the only man you ever truly respected, I said. He was a man of integrity. He was a man who shook hands and meant it. He told me, on our wedding day, that his daughter was wild, but had a good heart. He believed in you. I pushed off the door frame and took a step toward her. I used that date because it was the only combination that represented what died in this house, I said. When you opened that safe to hide your ring, you weren't just cheating on me. You were burying the values he taught you. You were locking away your conscience. She stared at me, horror-struck. The cruelty of the choice was precise, poetic, and devastating. It forced her to confront not just the betrayal of a husband, but the betrayal of her own lineage, her own self-image. You used his death to lock me out, she whispered. I used his memory to protect what was left of the truth, I countered. She slumped against the counter. The box of ornaments rattled. She looked broken. This was the final blow. The financial ruin she could blame on bad luck. The career loss she could blame on office politics. But this was a mirror I held up to her soul, and the reflection was hideous. I think you should go, I said. I have nowhere to go, she said, her voice hollow. I'm staying in a hostel, David. A hostel, with backpackers and kids half my age. I'm 34 years old. I was a vice president of sales. Now I'm sharing a bathroom with strangers. She looked up at me. Is that enough? Is the audit balanced now? Have I paid enough? I looked at her, and for a moment, I felt the weight of the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket. The envelope Emily Carter had given me. The evidence of the forged mortgage documents. The evidence that could send her to prison for 5 years. The auditor in me said, file it. A crime is a crime. Attempted fraud is a felony. Justice is blind. But then I looked at the empty house. I looked at the woman who was already a ghost. Sending her to prison would require effort. It would require testimony. It would require me to think about her, to talk about her, to keep her in my life as a defendant. Prison would be a roof over her head. It would be 3 meals a day. It would be a structure. What she had now, the chaos, the irrelevance, the silence, was a far worse punishment for a narcissist. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the envelope. "What is that?" she asked, eyeing the thick manila paper. "This," I said, "is a gift from Emily Carter." Her eyes widened. She knew Emily had been digging. "Inside this envelope," I continued, tapping it against my palm, "are the loan applications you and Brian filled out. The ones where you forged my signature to take out a second mortgage on this house. The ones you were going to submit the week I went to Denver." She stopped breathing. She knew exactly what I was holding. It was a loaded gun. "David," she rasped, "please." "This is 5 years in a federal penitentiary," I said. "Minimum. Bank fraud. Identity theft. Conspiracy." She dropped the box of ornaments. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She felt her knees. It wasn't a theatrical gesture. Her legs simply gave out. "Don't," she begged. "Please don't file it. I can't go to jail. I'll die in there. David, please. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll leave the state. Just don't give that to the police." I looked down at her. This was absolute power. I held her future in my hand. I could crush it, or I could release it. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at the trash can in the corner of the kitchen, the one thing the movers had left behind. I walked over to the trash can. "I'm not going to the police," I said. She looked up, hope and confusion warring in her face. "Not because of mercy," I said, "but because you aren't worth the paperwork." I tore the envelope in half, then in quarters. The sound of ripping paper was loud in the empty room. I dropped the pieces into the empty bin. "I don't want to see you in court," I said. "I don't want to see you in the news. I don't want to see you at all. You are a bad investment, Sarah, and I am writing you off." You letting me go?" she whispered. "I'm evicting you," I said. "For my life. Completely." I walked past her. I didn't help her up. I didn't look at the box of ornaments. "The new owners arrive in 10 minutes, I said, checking my watch. "I suggest you be gone before they get here. They might consider you a squatter." I walked to the front door. "David," she called out. I paused, my hand on the knob. "What happens now?" she asked. "What do I do?" I didn't turn around. "You survive," I said. "Or you don't. It's not my department anymore." I opened the door and stepped out. The sun had set. The sky was a deep, bruising purple. The streetlights had flickered on, casting pools of yellow light on the pavement. I walked to my car. I got in and started the engine. The dashboard lit up, a comforting array of dials and numbers. Fuel levels, temperature, RPM, logical, predictable. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw a movement in the rearview mirror. Sarah had come out onto the porch. She was standing there, the box of ornaments at her feet, watching me leave. She looked small against the darkening house, a silhouette fading into the background. I shifted into drive. I didn't speed. I didn't peel out. I drove at exactly the speed limit. I reached the end of the cul-de-sac and turned onto the main road. The house disappeared from view. I took a deep breath. The air in the car tasted recycled but clean. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Vance. "Wire transfer confirmed. Funds are in your new account. Dissolution of marriage decree signed by the judge. You are officially single." I looked at the text. I didn't feel elation. I felt lighter, like a diver who has finally surfaced after being held underwater for too long. The pressure was gone. The lungs could expand. I drove toward the highway. I had no destination for the night. Maybe I would drive north toward the lakes. Maybe I would just drive until the tank was empty and then refill it. The roadmap of my life had been erased. I had to draw a new one. I thought about Brian. I wonder where he was tonight. Probably in that motel, drinking cheap liquor, blaming the world for his failures. I thought about Emily. She would be fine. She was surgical. She had cut the cancer out and would heal. And Sarah. She was standing in a house that was about to be destroyed, holding on to ornaments from a dead grandmother, realizing that the code to her happiness had been in her hands all along, and she had changed it for a cheap thrill. I merged onto the interstate. The city of Chicago lay ahead, a grid of light and ambition. I reached over to the passenger seat. There was a notebook there, a fresh one. I had bought it that morning. I hadn't written anything in it yet. I thought about the title of the spreadsheet I had closed. Resolution. I thought about the new chapter. I smiled. A real smile. Not the polite grimace of a husband trying to keep the peace, but the smile of a man who knows the books are balanced. I turned on the radio. It was playing a classic rock song. Something about freedom. It was a cliché, but clichés are clichés because they are true. I accelerated. The engine roared. The road stretched out, endless and open. The audit was over. The assets were secured. The liabilities were liquidated. I was solvent. And for the first time in 14 months, I was free.